Well, that leads to a big question, and this is the next question. The next principle I want to teach is that prophets will not lead the church astray, however. And that seems to be confusing, admittedly and understandably. How can we say that prophets learn and prophets grow and prophets can even make mistakes, but prophets won't lead us astray? This is a struggle, and I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but I hope that this can help some. This idea of prophets not leading us astray is as old as the Restoration itself. When Wilford Woodruff gave the revelation leading to the end of the practice of plural marriage, he famously said in Official Declaration 1, quote, "The Lord will never permit me or any other man who stands as president of this church to lead you astray." It is not in the program. It is not in the mind of God. He wasn't the originator of that quote. Brigham Young earlier said, quote, "The Lord Almighty leads this church, and He will never suffer you to be led astray if you are found doing your duty. You may go home and sleep as sweetly as a babe in its mother's arms. As to any danger of your leaders leading you astray, for if they should try to do so, the Lord would quickly sweep them off the earth." Elder Ballard more recently said in 2014, "Keep your eyes on the leaders of the church. We will not and cannot lead you astray." And there are many teachings along this line that we're familiar with. Well, one of the things I want to talk about with you is what's the difference between leading astray and making mistakes? I think there's a difference, and this might help hopefully resolve some of the tension that's there. There's a difference between leading astray and making mistakes. If you take a look at this picture, here's a picture of my wife and I with our family. We have 7 children, and therefore we have made a lot of mistakes, and I'll be the first to admit that. If I brought in my 7 children onto this video one by one and lined them up and said, "Tell all the viewers of this video how many times your mother and father have made mistakes," this video would go on for hours and hours, I'm positive. I've had to repent, I've had to learn, I've had to apologize, I've had to grow. However, I'm confident that if we brought in those same 7 children and said, "Do your mom and dad lead your family astray?" I'm confident that all 7 of my children would say, "No, they lead us right. They lead us on the right path. They lead us on the right direction." I hope that can help see a little difference between making mistakes and leading astray. Leading astray has more to do with the direction, with the trajectory, with the intent, and therefore the result as a whole. Well, what do I personally believe it means that leaders will not lead us astray? I think central to the restoration is making and keeping covenants with Christ, coming unto Christ and living His gospel, and making those covenants that then take us into the holy temple to make the celestial covenants of Abraham. I don't think that the leaders of the church will lead us off of that path, the restored priesthood and its covenants, and taking those covenants and that priesthood to all the world and giving those. It's centered on covenants and ordinances. So maybe if I could say it this way, the prophet will never be allowed to purposely lead the church away from the revealed gospel of Jesus Christ, its priesthood ordinances and covenants that are necessary for the salvation and exaltation of the human family, even though there might be mistakes along the way in helping to bring that goal to pass as we learn and grow. Maybe if I could tap into my inner Elder Uchtdorf, if I could give an airplane analogy, the flight of the church is a little bit like an airplane. On its destination, its millennial destination, it might get delayed. It might be going too fast or too slow sometimes. It might be flying too high or too low in altitude from its flight plan, its intended flight plan. It might be a few degrees off, port or starboard. God is letting His pilots, His captains, His prophets fly the plane based on the situations and circumstances that they find the flight in. But remember that He is overseeing it from the control tower. He is watching the radar. He's messaging to His servants about what they should and shouldn't do and how to correct the plane if it does need to get off course or fly around a storm or deal with an oncoming unforeseen situation. The point is, He will not let the plane crash and kill its saints that it's carrying. He will not let it fly to an unintended destination. He will bring that plane with its covenant saints into its celestial destination, even though there needs to be adjustments along the flight path as a whole. Well, last few principles as I wrap this up. Remember that prophets have safeguards also. When we say prophets can make mistakes and they won't lead us astray, and how do we continue to balance that? Well, prophets do have safeguards. And one of those safeguards is the concept of the united voice of the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles. This is a standard that is established in section 107, verse 27 and 28, all the way through verse 30 of the Doctrine and Covenants. That's a revelation when the quorum of the 12 apostles was established. And they say that the quorum of the 12 forms a quorum equal in authority as the first presidency. And then in those verses it says, all the decisions of these quorums must be by the unanimous voice of the same to have power and validity. Now they do make an exception in that those very verses that a majority may render a decision, but the goal, the ideal is prophetic unanimity. Now, again, trying to be open and frank, there have not always been times in the history of our church when that guideline has been followed. There have been times where there have been unilateral decisions made by a president of the church, or even maybe by the first presidency. For example, back to Wilford Woodruff, when he announced that the church was going to end the practice of plural marriage in America, in the United States, some of the quorum of the 12 learned about that while on a train, reading in the newspaper. And they later had to be brought up to speed and briefed and discussed. And even then, there wasn't full agreement within it. This high standard of unanimity with the first presidency and the quorum of the 12, from the beginning of the Restoration to now, the leaders of our church have grown into reaching that ideal, in my view, and my read of church history. Well, President Nelson taught this. He said that prophets, quote, have counterbalances and safeguards abound so that no one in prophetic leadership can ever lead the church astray. And those safeguards are, one of them is this idea of unanimity with the first presidency and the quorum of the 12. Showing how we've grown into that as a leadership of the church, President Gordon B. Hinckley said it this way, quote, I can assure all members of this church that in the first presidency we follow such a procedure of unanimity in decisions. Two counselors working with a president preserve a wonderful system of checks and balances. They become a safeguard that is seldom, if ever, in error and affords great strength of leadership. He then goes on to say in that same talk, in almost the 50 years that he has served in the quorum of the 12 and the first presidency, he has never seen a major decision of doctrine or policy or implementation in the church where this concept of unanimity was not followed.